Have you ever heard of a legal puzzle so strange it sounds completely made up? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This is the story of Lucio Morigo, a man who was convicted of being married to two women at the same time, even though his first marriage, as it turns out, never legally existed. It's a case that's going to make you question what a fact really is.
So here's the big question, the one that kind of ties your brain in a knot. How can you be guilty of marrying twice if your first marriage was never real to begin with? It's a riddle that stumped lower courts and had to go all the way to the top for an answer. So let's unpack how this impossible situation even happened. All right, let's set the scene. Our main character is a man named Lucio Morigo, and in 1993, he found himself in some very serious legal hot water. He was formally charged with a crime that could have landed him in prison for a long time: bigamy. So what in the world is bigamy? It sounds kind of old-fashioned, but it's a serious crime. Simply put, it's marrying someone while you are still legally married to someone else. And here's the thing, you can't just decide your marriage is over. You need the courts to step in, either with an annulment or a divorce, or, of course, if a spouse passes away. It has to be legally dissolved. Now, for a prosecutor to make a bigamy charge stick, they have to prove four things. You can see them here. But I want you to laser focus on that very first one. The offender has been legally married. That little phrase, it's the absolute key to unlocking this entire bizarre case. So, from the outside, the case against Morigo looked like a slam dunk. I mean, the prosecution had two different marriage certificates, both with his name on them. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. The story behind that first piece of paper was, let's just say, anything but simple. Okay, let's walk through this timeline. In 1990, Morigo signs a marriage contract with a woman named Lucia Barrete. But, and this is the most critical detail of the whole story, they never actually had a wedding. There was no ceremony, no one officiating, no vows, just signatures on a document. 2 years later, he has a proper church wedding with another woman, Maria Giza Lumbago, and that's when the trouble starts. He gets hit with a bigamy charge, kicking off a legal battle that would drag on for over a decade. So you hear that there was no first wedding, and you're probably thinking, well, that sounds like a pretty solid defense, right? You would be wrong. The first court that heard the case, the regional trial court, looked at all the facts and found him guilty. So he appealed, and the Court of Appeals looked at the same facts and, you guessed it, found him guilty again. So what was going on? Why did two different courts convict him? Well, their logic was pretty straightforward, and this quote sums it up perfectly. They basically said, look, you don't get to be the judge of your own marriage. Even if you think it's invalid for some reason, you can't just ignore it and move on. You have to go to court and get an official declaration that it's null and void before you can get married again. For those lower courts, it was all about the order of operations. The rule was simple: get the court order first, then get remarried. Morigo did it backwards, and that procedural mistake, in their eyes, was the crime of bigamy. His future was looking pretty bleak. So after being found guilty twice, Lucio Morigo had one last shot: the Supreme Court. In 2004, the highest court in the land agreed to review his case. And what they decided? Well, it changed everything. They acquitted him. They threw out the two previous convictions and declared him not guilty. This was a complete bombshell. It left everybody scratching their heads and asking the same question: how? How could the Supreme Court look at the exact same facts as the other courts and come to a completely opposite conclusion? And this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of it. You see, the lower courts saw a flawed marriage. They thought of it as a real marriage that was, broken and needed to be officially canceled by a judge. But the Supreme Court saw something much more fundamental. They said there was no marriage to begin with. Because there was no ceremony, it wasn't just void or flawed, it was a complete legal fiction from the very start. And here's the court's reasoning in their own powerful words. They went right back to that very first element of bigamy we talked about. Remember? You have to have been legally married in the first place. The Supreme Court's logic was beautiful in its simplicity. Since Morigo's first marriage was a ghost, a fiction, he was never legally married to Lucia Barrete. And if there's no first marriage, there can't be bigamy. It's legally impossible. So why does this all matter? I mean, it's a fascinating story, but what's the bigger picture? This case created a huge legal precedent. It drew a thick, bright line in the law between a marriage that is merely void, flawed in some way, and one that is totally non-existent, a ghost in the machine. This table illustrates the difference perfectly. Let's compare Morigo's situation to another famous case, Republic versus Albios.
In Albios, a couple got married just to get citizenship papers, a total marriage of convenience. But, and here's the kicker, they actually had a ceremony. So the court said, hey, we don't care why you got married. You went through the legal steps, you had a ceremony, so it's a valid marriage. For Morigo, the lack of a ceremony meant there was nothing to be valid in the first place.
When you boil it all down, the Supreme Court's decision can be understood with a pretty simple analogy. Lucio Morigo was accused of abandoning his first ship, but the court found that this ship was never actually launched. A blueprint might have existed on paper, but you can't be guilty of abandoning a ship that never even left the harbor.
The Morigo case is so much more than just a quirky legal story. It's a powerful reminder that a signature on a piece of paper doesn't always create reality, especially in the eyes of the law. And it leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. How many of our own agreements, the contracts and promises we think are rock solid, might just be phantoms?